there. I'm Charles Perallo from BeInLibertarian.com, and today we're very, very honored to have a special guest, the legendary Glenn Beck. Glenn Beck, as you know, had a show on Fox News. He currently is the head of the Blaze. How you doing, Glenn?
I'm very good, really good.
Okay, so we have to talk a bit about your book, Liars, and but before going in on that, I think there's one question that, with our page on Being Libertarian, a lot of people have asked us, right now, just to talk a little bit how I feel about you, honestly. I feel that, when it came to economics, you brought Chicago school and Austrian school and kind of complex topics to the masses. You talked about Hayek, you talked about Ayn Rand, you talked about Milton Friedman. And then, you were the guy to go against the typical right. You came out for gay marriage. You came out for legal marijuana. You went to the border and tried to help out some kids. So I'm wondering, are you going to be the guy to come out and say, I want President Gary Johnson? What are your feelings on that right now?
I wish I could. I mean, that's probably who I'm going to end up voting for. I'm not endorsing anybody, but he's probably the guy I'm going to vote for. But I wish I liked him more than I do. I think he's kind of goofy, and I think he's actually bigger government than I care for. When I look at the 3 or 4 people that are running, he's clearly the best of the lot. But I have some real issues with him.
Okay, well, I mean, I've known Gary for a long time. I've interviewed him before. I was actually, in 2011, probably the first volunteer for his campaign during that time. And I look at Gary Johnson, I think of your new book, Liars, and I'm like, I think this is the most honest guy to really run for president in maybe modern times. I think that here's a guy who will admit when he doesn't know something. He talks about a platform.
I think when you saw the thing that he did on MSNBC where he said Aleppo, and then they gave him every opportunity to say it wasn't so bad, and he kept saying, no, it is. It's bad. I should know what that is. That was my analysis on him. Here's a guy who is not playing the game and saying, yeah, I should have known that, but not necessarily the thing to do. But you can tell he's at least being honest. I will tell you, I've had him on the air, and he does not pander. He takes his lumps and he goes right for it, and I respect him. I respect him for that.
Well, one thing is I've moderated a couple of the Libertarian Party debates. I talked about this discussion. During the primary, you interviewed one of the other primary opponents, Austin Peterson, who came in second. Now, I supported Gary Johnson from day one, but what did you think of Austin? What did you think of McAfee? Do you think the Libertarian Party made the right choice in Orlando? Do you think I made the right choice voting for Gary?
I don't know. I mean, I have no idea. I really like Austin. He speaks my language a little bit more, and I think that's the biggest problem is we're not recognizing that people speak different languages, and so they hear different things. Austin is young. I think he has a future. I wish even if it wasn't somebody who could win. Which I personally think this is a huge loss for the Libertarians this year. This was the Libertarian year, I think. 2020 will be even bigger, but it's going to be harder. But I just wish somebody could get on to the debates, and that's why I wrote a Medium post supporting that. Gary's got to get on to the debates and hold it together and not look, goofy. And
he is a New Mexican. He's a flamboyant guy.
Right. But if you want to move the party forward, don't necessarily be flamboyant when you're in front of 50 million people. Be rock solid and show that these principles are true and will work.
Do you think there was a better LP nominee? Do you think Rand Paul would have been a better nominee, or maybe Mike Lee of Utah? Do you think one of those guys could have perhaps taken it a bit farther than what Gary's capable of doing?
Yes, I think Mike Lee or Rand Paul would have been better. But I read your article with who was it? Where you were saying one of Rand's biggest problems, maybe it was with Gary, and said one of Rand's biggest problems was he wasn't talking about the things libertarians talk about.
Well, I would say I remember that article I did a while back, and I would say that it wasn't really talking so much about Rand Paul not doing things libertarians care about, but he just didn't focus on issues I felt regular people cared about. He didn't talk about, he talked about Planned Parenthood and he talked about the NSA. He wasn't talking about the economy. He wasn't talking about monetary policy. He wasn't talking about taxes. He kind of just came off as a generic Republican who doesn't like the government in our phones. And I mean, you, I believe, chose Ted Cruz in the primary over Rand. Did you have any reason for doing that?
Yeah, you'll notice that I didn't choose anybody at the beginning. I let Rand run his course and Ted as well, and I said to both of them, because both of them wanted me to endorse, and I said, I'm not going to endorse. Let the best constitutionalist win. And when Rand stepped out and America said, okay, I like Ted better than Rand, I was for Ted, and I've never endorsed before. And I think that there are some, uh, you know, uh, while Rand Paul wasn't the perfect candidate, I didn't think Ted Cruz obviously was not the perfect candidate either. But
Well,
we had to have somebody who's a constitutionalist, and we don't have one now.
well, with Ted Cruz, I kind of look at it and I say that if he was the Republican nominee, he would have been the best nominee regarding economic policies they have had since Calvin Coolidge. I
I
think.
I think you're spot on. I don't think, people we keep liking to compare to Ronald Reagan. I don't want Ronald Reagan. I want Calvin Coolidge. And I think, and Ted knew that. Ted was much more Calvin Coolidge than we've had since Calvin Coolidge.
Now, regarding last question before we get into the book, and this relates to the guy who is the Republican nominee. One thing I've noticed, because I'm going to be interviewing Ann Coulter tomorrow, who's a big Trump supporter, I'm going to make the point to Ann Coulter, and I'm going to ask you the same question right now. I look at Donald Trump on economics. I see that he wants the worst trade views of any presidential candidate I've seen in years. I look at him and I say he has this disastrous budget plan. And I'm telling people, I think that when it comes to comparing him to Hillary, I think Hillary Clinton is more fiscally conservative than Donald Trump. I mean, would you agree with that? What are your thoughts there?
If Hillary Clinton wasn't so absolutely and totally corrupt, you could convince me that Hillary Clinton is a much better candidate, um, conservative wise, than Donald Trump. She is so wildly corrupt. I mean, it's a death zone going anywhere near her. But when it comes to policies, again, if she wasn't so corrupt, I don't know. But Donald Trump says he's for a single payer health care plan. That's left of Hillary Clinton. When you look at his trade policy, it is as disastrous as Smoot-Hawley. He
Worse, I would say.
is he is he is an absolute total nightmare.
And also, I mean, you look at his spend. I mean, I would actually say that Bernie Sanders is the socialist that people, when countries become socialist, Bernie Sanders is who they follow. Donald Trump is what they get. Would you say that this is the Bernie movement happening in reality?
Um, uh, I don't know. I don't think the countries get a Donald Trump very often. Maybe once every 100 years. And when you combine, and I'm sorry, I know people don't want to hear this, but you look at his positions and his policies, he's beyond not conservative. In many ways, when it comes to healthcare, he's socialist. And there's nothing worse than having a national socialist.
It's worse than a democratic socialist.
Yes, it is. Yes,
Oh,
it.
oh, Bernie. By the way, was there any Democrat you kind of liked in that primary? There was only five who ran. Was there any Democrat you would have thought could have done the job a little bit better who's in politics today? Anyone in mind?
No, I mean, no, they're all the same now. I mean,
Uh,
I really wanted to see Bernie Sanders and either Rand Paul or Ted Cruz be the two nominee, because I
oh,
think that's what America is. I think having an actual conversation um, uh, about uh, the real philosophies of true free market principles not what we've been doing for 100 years, but true free market principles and true constitutional government, as opposed to socialist Marxist principles and Marxist philosophies. That's where we should be, the conversation we should be having. Make a choice. Instead, we vote for corruption. We vote for lies. I don't even know how these, out of 300 million people, these are the two we come down to. How's that?
Ooh, that's pretty sad. But okay, so going into your book now, Liars, because that's what we're really here to discuss. Give a basic pitch on your book. What's it about? What's the focus here? Why'd you write it?
It's really not. I mean, it is something that I started looking at about 10 years ago. And Jonah Goldberg really moved things for me about 8 years ago when he wrote his book Liberal Fascism. I was reading a book called Woodrow Wilson and the Roots of Modern Progressivism, and it's real. I mean, it'll make your head hurt. It's really, really scholarly and dense, but very, very good. And Jonah came out with his book Liberal Fascism, and it was brain candy a little bit. Really wanted to understand what's happening in America. The problem is that most people look at progressives and they say, "Oh, that's the Democrats. The Democrats are progressive." No, the Republicans are just as progressive. And me saying this, 7 years ago, got me uninvited to every CPAC convention until this last year. But progressivism is the disease in America, and it's why I believe that we're in America 2.0. The America of the founding is now officially over. This next president will cement it. And we now have to rediscover our roots in new ways and relaunch liberty and freedom and economic freedom in new ways. And that's for the next generation. But what this book tries to do is explain in the stories of their lives who these people were, how we got here, and what their real intent was, why they were like this, and take you through step by step and show you how it works, why we keep believing this lie, why we keep elevating this lie. What is it about us and what is it about them on both sides of the aisle?
Well, talking about that and saying the Republicans are just as progressive, which I agree with, I look at and I say George W. Bush. George W. Bush, if I were to be asked right now who's the worst president, Barack Obama or George W. Bush, I would probably lean on Bush because I think he grew government more than Barack Obama did. And that's maybe because Barack Obama didn't know how to grow government. He wasn't that competent. But I look at it and I say, here was a guy who turned a relatively stable budget into one of the biggest deficits in history. He increased regulation more than Bill Clinton did. His foreign policy was a disaster. I mean, would you say George W. Bush is the reason we're kind of here right now? Do you think he was a flawed president?
I think he was a progressive president, a bad progressive. I disagree with you saying that he was more progressive than Barack Obama. Barack Obama added more regulations than any president. He added much more debt than George W. Bush did. I just want you to know we're arguing between two piles of progressive dog crap on the yard and saying which one's stinkier. I mean, they're both pretty stinky. I don't want either of them. The point here is that it is in both parties, and you'll notice with this election, and this shocked me because I meant it when I said I'm a constitutionalist. I believe in the Constitution, and I believed a lot of Republicans did too. I knew they were the John McCains, but I didn't realize how foolish or insincere so many Republicans were. And I'm not talking about the Republicans that are jumping on the bandwagon now saying, hey, we've got to do anything to stop Hillary. That's 20 years of she's evil. I'm talking about the people who jumped on early, like Ann Coulter. There isn't a conservative or constitutional bone, I believe, in her body. How do you get on that Trump train?
I'm going to enjoy bringing that up to her tomorrow, by the way.
But I'm sure she will have lots to respond.
Oh, Ann Coulter. But I look at what you're saying right now, and the thing is, the Republicans always claim they're not for big government, but I look at it and I just think about it, and I'm saying, the Republicans, it seems like they only care about removing illegal immigrants and stopping people from getting welfare. They don't want to talk about the military budget. They don't really want to talk about Medicare or Social Security that much. And they like these big departments. It seems like they want like a 2% cut to government while they grow a bunch of other things and they deport people. Would you say that's the message of the Republican Party to some extent?
I don't even know what the message of the Republican Party is, except grow the size of the government, grow their control. I don't know what it is. I don't know who they are. I don't really care anymore. I think the Republicans are about to see their party completely lost. If Donald Trump loses, look for the growth of the alt-right. I don't know if anybody keeps up with the politics of Russia, but look up look up Dugin. What's his first name? Alexander Dugin. Look him up. He is absolutely terrifying, and is responsible for a lot of what's going on over in Russia. And the alt-right believes in a lot of the stuff that he believes in, and he's helping fund a lot of this stuff.
Well, I look at it and I say that right now you mentioned the Republican Party kind of going crazy. Bill Weld, who's Gary's running mate, I'm a pretty big fan of his. Bill Weld said he predicts the Republican Party might become the new Whig Party because they're supporting conspiracy theories. I mean, Donald Trump's a birther. He's anti-vaccine. They are supporting isolationism, and they're not fiscally conservative. I mean, do you think that there's a chance this is the new Whig Party?
Oh, I said that in 2012, I think, that the Republicans would go the way of the Whigs. I mean, it's over. It's a matter of time. I think a very small Charles Sumner moment was the moment of Ted Cruz standing up and not endorsing Donald Trump and them booing him. I mean, when you say vote for a constitutionalist, vote for somebody who's going to stand by these things, and you boo, I think you're entering the time of Charles Sumner, which is, next step is new party.
So what is the new party? Is it the Libertarian Party? What are we? We're talking here.
I have no idea. I really don't. If we don't come together, though, and do a couple of things, learn from history, learn from the progressive movement. I mean, it's really important that people understand the progressive movement, not just so you know who they are, but how they did it, because it has to be reversed. And the one thing the progressives knew is nobody wants a revolution. So how do we get there slowly? How do we move the people slowly? And when I mean slowly, I don't mean over 100 years. It's not going to take 100 years anymore with technology. It might take 5 years. It might take 10 years. But you can move it if we're smart and we model ourselves after the progressives, without all the evil and death. Model ourselves after the progressives. They were very smart. They went into the universities. They went into the media. They wined and dined the press, and they moved the American people slowly. We can't just go on now and say, look, I'm for the drug war. Doesn't work. It doesn't work. End the drug war. End it. It's modern day prohibition, and it is working exactly the same way. So end it. But you can't come out and say that today. You can come out and say, let's look at, it's not Spain. It's off the coast of Spain.
Portugal.
Look at what Portugal did. Look at what Portugal did. Let's look for a successful model like Portugal. that sounds entirely different than let's just legalize all drugs, because people speak different languages, and conservatives and constitutionalists, who are the most likely to go over and vote for a libertarian, when you say I want to legalize drugs, all they think about is, well, that's because you want heroin. No, it's based on principle, but I understand after 100 years of being taught that, how you feel that way. Those things, Penn Jillette and I have talked before. We need to find those things that we can all unite on and get around and support. And as Penn said, Glenn, in 20 years when, we're ready to check out, that's when we'll get to these gigantic departments that everybody, that nobody agrees on. If we can just get rid of the easy stuff to start with and moving it in the right direction.
Well, would you say, because there's one thing I have to harp in on, I think I'd have very bad journalistic abilities if I didn't ask this. Would you say you, Glenn Beck, support legalizing all drugs? Would you say cocaine should be legal, heroin should be legal? What's your thoughts there?
Yes, in a progressive way, yes, I am for the legalizing of drugs. With that being said, until you can't legalize drugs in this country without also strengthening the other side, like Portugal did, of caring for people, and more importantly, setting up a system where, until people understand Ben Franklin, the best way to help people in poverty is make them uncomfortable in their poverty. The best way to help, I would say this as a recovering alcoholic, the best way to help somebody is to look at them and say, do you want help? Yeah, if I could just get $1 for another hit, I'd be fine. Yeah, okay, not going to help you. And walk over them. You can't, you got to walk around them or walk over them. You can't try to pick them up and force them back on their feet. And legalizing drugs will cause a problem on the other side, where everyone will want to then take care of everybody else. The government's got to take care of them. No, we don't. They have a responsibility themselves. Now, if they want to get off, then we can help them. We can help them through our churches, our public organizations, our private organizations. We can do a lot of stuff. And the worst of the worst, maybe we can look at the government and ask for a little bit of help, maybe on the state level. But it's up to the personal responsibility of each of them. And so while you give people more freedom, you also better strengthen their responsibility. And so when I say I'm for legalizing drugs, you have to understand that personal responsibility has to be retaught to the society. Otherwise, total freedom just becomes a train wreck.
If I can add something here, yeah, I was just gonna say, it really reminds me of like a very telling image I saw earlier on Facebook. Was there was a guy sitting outside of a Walmart with the sign saying, like help wanted, something like that, basically asking for money, and there's a manager standing right there with the sign saying Walmart hiring. It's kind of like exactly what you're telling. You have to be responsible for your own actions, and you can't.
This is an old timey way of saying what you just saw, and that is John Adams. This system is wholly inadequate for a non-religious or what else did he say wasn't religious only? It's a non-religious and something society. If we don't get our self-control, I get mine from God. Penn Jillette gets his from his parents. If we don't have innate self-control, we cannot be trusted with freedom. We will destroy ourselves quickly. So we have two fronts we have to fight, and that is the freedom front and the responsibility front. We have to say, there's no babysitter anymore. Yes, you fail, and that's a good thing.
To even touch on your point with God, you say pull it from God. I'm Jewish, and in the Torah it even teaches you God will only do so much, but you have to start it till God will want to help you Himself.
I'm really bothered by people who are taking the attitude of this election that God's going to help us out on this. No, you have to do everything yourself, and you have to apply your principles. If you just say, well, I'm going to vote for the lesser of two evils, and they're both evil, God can't do anything with that. He's not going to help you out because you're choosing that. You have to do the very best that you can and choose righteousness every time. And by the way, I think it's this system is wholly inadequate for anyone other than a moral and religious people. We've got to find our morals somehow or another. Right now, morals and character don't count.
Okay, so closing this up, I want to do 3 questions that I'd like you to answer pretty quickly. The first question is, if Donald Trump wins, what happens over the next 4 years?
Geez, why would you ask me that? I didn't think he was going to win the primary.
Oh, I didn't. I actually lost a bet for $500 over the primary, and I actually thought John Kasich was going to win. So I don't know. I don't know how that happened. Yeah, it happened. It happened, but
maybe there's, maybe it would be. I don't want to speculate. Reed Dugan. Reed Dugan.
okay. So next question: what happens if Hillary Clinton wins?
Reed Dugan.
Okay, that's the same
Better
answer.
yet, read the coming insurrection. Read Dugan for Trump. Read the coming insurrection for Hillary.
Okay, and final question: if Gary Johnson wins, if the miracle happens, and Gary Johnson and Bill Weld go to the White House, what happens?
Depending on what happens overseas and what their reactions are overseas, we perhaps have a chance of saving some remnants. But he's got to be a much better spokesman for freedom than he is for himself right now.
Would you be willing to give Gary Johnson some speech coaching lessons? Because I think you might be able to help him out a bit.
No, I don't think Gary wants any help from me, but I would be happy to lend my advice to him if it would be useful to him. He's got to be a better spokesperson. This next president has the weight. Truman said when he took over after FDR died, he said it felt as though the moon, the sun, and all the stars fell on his shoulders. And I think the next president's going to feel that as well. And he better be good at speaking and teaching the American people, or we're going to be going down the wrong path.
Glenn, once again, I want to thank you for coming on. Glad we're closing this up here. And really, I look at this and say that when it comes to this election overall, you really have been an aid to America, something I think was a value and is a value. You came out to basically be the first guy in major media saying, hey, maybe we don't need Jeb Bush, maybe we need a new guy. And you know, where a lot of people took the easy turn with the conservative audience to try and appeal to Donald Trump, you're the leader of the anti-Trump movement to some extent, and for that I have a lot of respect for you. Thank you.